Now.
On 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
It's 8:06. It's O'Connor and Company. Coming up in 1 hour, we hand it off to Chris Plant. We've been covering Anthony Fauci's day on Capitol Hill yesterday, as well as Hunter Biden's day in court. Coming up in 30 minutes, Dr. David Asher, he led Mike Pompeo's State Department investigation into the origins of COVID-19. Boy, there was a whole lot of finger-pointing obfuscation yesterday by Dr. Fauci over the origins of the virus. Something I think that we would all be interested in knowing, you would think, you know? But no, who cares? Hey, these things just happen, these viruses. We'll get into that with Dr. David Asher. It's Larry O'Connor alongside Julie Gunlock. Busy morning today, Julie. Thank you for being here as always.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
And joining us right now is Dr. Scott Atlas. He was one voice of reason during the pandemic. He started out by speaking out about some of the decisions that were being made at the highest levels of our government coming out of the White House. He, of course, was a professor he's a professor at Stanford University and a doctor and expert on these things. He then got hired by Donald Trump to be one voice in the room to sort of offer some counter proposals. His book about that process, A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America. Dr. Atlas, thanks for joining us. I'm sure you were watching with keen interest yesterday.
Yes, thanks for having me. It was quite a stunning revelation for a lot of people, but it actually underscored everything I was saying about what happened, and I outlined a lot of it in my book.
Well, let me just ask you this. Based on what you saw under oath yesterday, was Anthony Fauci telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth when recounting his involvement in some of the decisions that were made during the pandemic?
Well, I mean, this is what happened. Because he's, there are certain technicalities like he didn't literally do things. That was the CDC. Here's what we saw. Number one, it underscored everything that I had tried to tell people, which was these decisions by Fauci and Deborah Birx and Robert Redfield, the head of the CDC. There's three of them. They had no data on what they were saying. They had no knowledge of the data. He didn't read the studies. He admitted he doesn't even read the grants that he signs off on. They just made up stuff for guidance. There was anti-science going on, complete pseudoscience. And his policies and Birx and the Redfields lockdowns and school closures, they were instituted. And those policies harmed and killed millions of people, especially kids and the poor. The second thing we saw is there's a run from accountability. This is what you're getting at. I mean, he would say things like, well, that was the CDC's decision, quote unquote. Well, not really. I was in the room. Fauci had the most influential voice, and they all backed each other up. Birx was the head of the task force on the medical side, Redfield, head of the CDC, Fauci. There was this triumvirate of people who knew nothing, yet you were claiming and shaming people who disagree with him, and they were extraordinarily influential in the U.S. and the world. Third, we saw that he was lying about cover-ups. I mean, this is in the FOIA emails, right? He was complicit in organizing people, and even if there was no overt pronouncement by him to cover up about things like origins or funding research, this is the guy who controls the money. So there's the self-cancellation of people who are afraid to speak up because their careers are in jeopardy, and they owe their careers to his funding. And then I think their bigger lessons are this. We saw a show of a complete lack of respect for Americans. Zero. That's what was going on. It was immoral what was done. He shifted the burden of the disease to the poor people, to kids. He didn't know what he was doing. He, Birx, and Redfield, all three of them, they had no respect for individuals. They didn't bother to even learn the data. They rejected everything I said. I showed dozens of papers with data every meeting I was in, and all I heard back was silence or, well, you're an outlier. That's not the talking of a scientist. We saw a bureaucrat here, a career bureaucrat.
Doctor, well said, absolutely laid out perfectly. And what bothered me the most watching that hearing is the complete lack of contrition, the inability to say, we got some stuff wrong. I think there's an awful lot of Americans who would forgive some of what was done because we didn't know what was happening. There was uncertainty. But at that hearing, he remains defiant, and the Democrats were so eager to defend him and again smear people who were bringing up some of the things that he did, the outrageous things that he did. This speaks to me, this tells me nothing's changed. How do you feel about the state of public health?
Yeah, absolutely. Nothing has changed. There's, first of all, the legacy of Fauci and Birx and Redfield, the massive deaths and harms, the long-lasting health harms to people from these lockdowns, cancer, obesity in children, psychological damage. Kids have massive educational losses, particularly the poor kids. And those are the health heinous harms. But also this fiasco has caused, as was articulated in the hearing, a massive drop in trust in public health and science. This is disastrous. And secondly, and this wasn't said, it caused a huge division, hate among Americans. It was like the era, I hate to say it, but like Nazi Germany, where groups were decided to be dangerous to everyone. They had to be arrested. They had to be barred from public places because he didn't wear a mask. There was never any science on masks. This was all, frankly, BS. But what you're saying something about there was no apology. This is very important for people to understand. The apology doesn't change what happened, no. But as we know in our lives, first to restore trust, you need to apologize. But secondly, as a society, we cannot move forward with any closure unless there is some sort of admission that these people were wrong, and we must demand it. We must keep demanding it, even though they will never admit they were wrong. Never. They do not have the integrity to admit they were wrong, and we can never let this happen again. So, we need to demand this kind of stuff. We need to step up our game, and people need to demonstrate the courage to step up for what they know is right, because it was not just a shock what he and others did. To me, it was a shock that people acquiesced so quickly.
Dr. Atlas, well said. And our guest is Dr. Scott Atlas. He's a senior fellow in health policy at the Hoover Institute of Stanford University, and his book is A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America. Listen, I am still stunned that every single election held in this country isn't a referendum on the incumbent's role during COVID-19. That is all we should be talking about. What did you do when you were on watch and you had power during the pandemic, and why did you do it? And are you sorry for it? And yet somehow this is not a major topic. And I would like, since you were in the room, like the room at the White House, we're having an election right now. What should Donald Trump do to put this in the forefront? I think he should be emphasizing this, that he did what he could, but he also got lousy advice from these people, and he should be running point, should he get reelected, to uncover all of this so we can restore faith in our health policy experts. What do you think?
We need to elect people who are free to admit that wrong was done, that the media, by the way, put a lot of pressure on these people and the candidates and everybody else. But you'll notice I actually feel a lot of the testimony, the focus, is in part about the origins of COVID, because a lot of people on both sides were complicit in these lockdowns. They failed, Republicans and Democrats. There's a failure of leadership in both administrations, okay? Because the buck stops with the person in charge, and that was a failure, a gross failure. But what should be done moving forward is we need, first of all, an immediate cleaning house of everyone in these CDC, FDA, NIH, these agencies that have commanded power and have career bureaucrats. We need term limits on the people, not just at the top of the agencies. I'm not talking about the elected officials. I'm talking about the appointed people, mid-level, need term limits. We need to have transparency injected. All the meetings of the FDA about the vaccines and everything, they said things that were so heinous, but they were hidden behind closed doors. They're employees of the American people. These people don't have a right to just talk in secret. They owe us the accountability. We need to control the funding. There are 15 academic universities and medical schools that get $500 million per year plus from American taxpayers, yet they're doing clinical trials on young people on experimental drugs for the COVID vaccine, so that they have no significant resist for a serious illness from. Okay, this is unethical. So we need to put the money, leverage the money that's being given to these people. You heard this yesterday. $700 million was given in shared royalties to employees of the NIH during the COVID era. Okay, it's not one person.
That is such a scandal. Dr. Ellis, can you stay with us because we're so dedicated to this? We got to take a quick minute on traffic. So can you hold on just a quick sec? Thanks. 8:15
WMAL, making sense of the border because laws either matter or they don't. Download the WMAL app to stream us for free.
Dr. Scott Ellis is at the Hoover Institution at Stanford. His book is A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America. He was on President Trump's coronavirus task force. And Dr. Atlas, there was a lot of finger-pointing yesterday from Anthony Fauci. It's amazing. This guy was at the center of the storm, yet apparently not responsible for anything. Everything was somebody else's decision. Can you shed a little light here about the roles that people played? You touched on it a little bit. And this whole idea, especially, I can't get past the 6-foot social distancing rule because that affected so much, including the election process. You know, we upended our typical norms with regard to ballots and custody of ballots and in-person voting. It was all under the auspices. We have to do these mail-in ballots. We have to do these drop boxes because people can't stand in line and get into a little polling place because of social distancing. When Fauci says, hey, that wasn't me, it was the CDC, can you please shed light on that and exactly how those conversations went down?
Well, those rules were put in from the beginning, which was sort of February in the task force. But I didn't get there till end of July. But I confronted and talked about what the data was in the meetings and in the media. There was no data to support 6-foot rules. In fact, you may have realized that some countries had 3 feet. Some countries had 6 feet. You know, I mean, there was just random, arbitrary people leading all the pandemic responses, by the way. These people really, frankly, are just, you know, if you can have a unanimity of imbeciles running things. I mean, they had no knowledge as scientists. There was no critical thinking. You know, I hate to be harsh, but I saw it with my own eyes. I brought in 24 papers. When I was asked what's the risk to children, I cited the data. Birx, Fauci, and Redfield sat there with no knowledge. People failed to understand the level of gross incompetence, the lack of knowledge. People who have titles do not necessarily have knowledge. Okay, we've learned this. Fancy titles do not confer necessarily that they're the authorities. And in fact, when you spend 30, 40 years in the government, who do you think survives that? It's not people who are the best people who are in there. I'm sorry to say, but it's obvious. These are people that are skillful at navigating political decisions. They're not people you know, who are there because of some kind of incredible excellence. That's just the way it is. That's what we saw. That's proven. So what we had is Deborah Birx was in charge of the medical side. She gave all the advice to all the states. She told them, lock down, shut schools, you know, the 6-foot rule, mask everywhere. These are people that walked around, you know, with masks, and then they took them off, and they had them hanging from their ears in the White House. I mean, it was just bizarre, complete. There was never, you know, and here's the problem. And your field is part of the problem, your media field, okay?
Yeah, I know.
And you know this. Yeah. But, you know, when I came, you could still find people criticizing me for even questioning that masks worked. Masks don't work, period. That was proven. Yep. That was known in the spring of 2020. They do not stop the spread. They do not protect the wearer for any of these viral respiratory infections. Yet they tried to destroy me for saying that. They tried to destroy Trump for not wearing his mask when he got out of the hospital.
That's right.
Even though he had already had COVID and he was finished. But it doesn't matter. The masks don't work. The 6-foot rule was an arbitrary. It was all pseudoscience. Yet you'll remember that these people who had titles, like Redfield, head of the CDC, did some interview where he said, everything Scott Atlas says is 100% false. It's actually the opposite. Everything I said was 100% correct. He didn't know anything, and I saw it with my own eyes. They knew no data, and now they go and run from accountability. Oh, I didn't do that, because they were just so-called advisors. So it is true. The governors, their hands are really stained by blood. The governors made the decisions. When you have states run by people like Gavin Newsom, Whitmer, you know, Cuomo in New York. I mean, these people, their policies were were grossly wrong, malfeasance to the highest order, no critical thinking, and people died. And when you do that, and then you censor the discussion, which they did, they took down my YouTube, they took down my Twitter feed as I'm the advisor to the president. You'd think people should hear what the advisor to the president is saying during a crisis.
Yeah.
But no, the people at Twitter, and it was not the Biden administration. It was during 2020.
That's right.
I want to make this clear. The private companies, the people working in them themselves, they took down me. They took down Trump, by the way.
Yes.
And the reason that people, in my view, gave adulation to Fauci and Birx and Redfield was in part because they were afraid, people, but also when there was conflict with whatever Trump said, you are defined as you're right. Because everything Trump said, by definition, must have been wrong according to this, hateful population we have in the media and in the United States. So we need to fix that.
Dr.
We need to
Allison,
return to morality here.
I try not to drag you into the dirty, tawdry, unpredictable field of politics, so I'll say it. You don't have to agree, but I think they wanted people to be miserable, and they wanted to blame Trump for being incompetent and anti-science because it was an election year. If this were not a presidential election year, I don't think it would have been quite as intense. But they had and the social distancing ended up upending our basic norms for voting protocols, which I believe affected the outcome as well.
It started that way. I'll agree with this. It started that way early on, but you have to realize it was worldwide.
Then it became a cult. Then it was a cult.
I mean, these people, they're obsessed, and it shows the value of and the power of propaganda. This was propaganda to the level of the worst regimes in history, similar to that.
Dr. Scott Atlas,
we have to be thinkers now.
He was in the room where it happened. He lays it out in his book, A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America, and if Donald Trump should win. I pray to God that he asks you to come in and be the point man on clearing this up, cleaning it up, and getting us back to a place where we can trust our public health officials. And, by the way, I pray that you will accept that, because I don't think it's a slam dunk that you would want to have anything to do with that task. But I hope it happens. Dr.
Okay,
Alice.
well, good talking to you.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, exactly. No, don't commit right now. Thank you, Doctor.
Now, on 105.9 FM and streaming worldwide on the WMAL app.
O'Connor and Company.
8:36 now. It's O'Connor and Company. Coming up in 30 minutes, it's Chris Plant. I'm Larry O'Connor. She's Julie Gunlock. We are kicking butt this morning, Julie. Are you excited?
Oh, always.
Thanks.
But not convincing. I'm sorry. I should have been more enthusiastic.
Yeah, man.
Of course, I'm excited.
Anthony Fauci. We've covered lots of aspects of Anthony Fauci's testimony yesterday. News stories and mixed messages and finger pointing having to do with the vaccine, its effectiveness, what they knew, what they didn't know. Also, same with social distancing, masking. But then there's the origin story. We were told we have a natural occurrence, maybe bat soup at the wet market in Wuhan. Don't pay any attention to that lab, though. And don't pay any attention to any gain-of-function research that the taxpayers may have been paying for at that lab. Here's an exchange with Jim Jordan that finished one part of the questioning.
Do you agree that there was a push to downplay the lab leak theory?
Not on my part.
Really?
Really?
Wow. I think most of the country would find that amazing. I still got 11 seconds.
But look at the facts. I've kept an open mind throughout the entire process.
All right, I yield back.
Let's look at the facts. Joining us right now is the man who was the point person for Secretary of State Mike Pompeo to get to the bottom of the origins, Dr. David Asher. Doctor, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I remember interviewing Secretary Pompeo during the pandemic when he said very early on, I want to say it was April or May, he said, listen, China's not cooperating. They're not showing us any of the original strains of the virus so we can look at the DNA of it, that we can help. They're not acting like a global partner actually interested in helping people with this virus. They're acting like a country who has something to hide. When you were tasked with this, what did you discover with regard to the origins of this virus?
Well, I mean, the first point is the Secretary's point he made to you that there was absolutely no transparency or information flow coming from the Beijing government to the Secretary's office. We were trying to even, get meetings with the ambassador from China here in Washington, and we couldn't. They wouldn't talk to us. I mean, it was like they were sending us a message. This is this is something that they were somehow culpable in. You know, there's a sort of look of guilt. It's like when your kids do something wrong, they sort of dance around it. This is the way the Chinese are acting. I mean, they just were like, don't ask us. We can't. I mean, at one stage, I actually met with a senior Chinese official with several other colleagues, and he said, and I knew the guy for years because I worked on East Asia policy, starting under Secretary Powell as his advisor. He said, just don't ask. I can't tell you what happened. I mean, it was basically the admission that they had been ordered to cover this up, which we know they did. I mean, nobody destroyed samples on January 3rd of 2020, really before even the Chinese fully understood, I believe, the scale and scope of what this could do to their own population. They were destroying samples from not just the wet market in Wuhan, but from hospitals all over the country. So they obviously knew then exactly what they were facing. And our suspicion is that as of mid-November, at the latest, there had been some sort of lab meltdown in the Wuhan, in Wuhan, and it may have involved more than one lab, by the way, where they had a leak, and it started spreading among the population of workers, and they covered it up. But the thing is, what they started with was a synthetic version of COVID-19. This is the key point that should have come out yesterday. That the Chinese were working on synthetic biology to build all sorts of dangerous vectors, we call them, related to weapons of mass destruction. It wasn't necessarily a bomb being dropped biologically, but it was designed to cause huge amounts of damage, which it did. But it wasn't supposed to get out. When it got out, they covered it up. So it's they're still guilty.
And that didn't come out yesterday. And Dr. Asher, this is what's vexing to a lot of people. If that's the case, and if that's what the findings are, and that's the most likely occurrence here, why on earth would the top virologist and a person within the U.S. government's health policy protocols, Anthony Fauci, why would he appear to downplay that? Why, or at even worst, cover that up? Why would he not be as motivated as you are to get to that and get the word out unless we were in some way involved?
Well, we were involved. I mean, there's no doubt. I don't think we caused COVID-19. But we did help create it. We didn't create it deliberately for it to be released, but the gain-of-function research that everyone's heard of was being applied at significant scale, starting really around 2015 at the Hudson Institute with the aid of NIAID, Fauci's outfit. Fauci figured that out around February 1st. He knew full well they'd been funding dangerous gain-of-function research to create a novel and dangerous
February 1st
of 2020, I should say.
So this is 6 weeks, 7 weeks before 15 days to slow the spread.
Yeah, but he knew that he found out, he was briefed on it, and he panicked, and he's like, holy crap, we're going to get blamed for this thing. So he went through he began with a systematic scientific cover-up. And whether he actually paid to play the scientists that did the reviews that said it came out of nature, after they all initially said pretty much, 85% of them said it came out of a lab leak and looked bioengineered, they magically switched in 3 days. And then all of them, literally every one of these scientists who was involved, got big grants from NIAID in the months that followed. I'm sorry, I'm not saying that Fauci is guilty. I can't make that determination, but there's too many circumstantial pieces of evidence here that he used money to try to sway the debate. And let's not forget, what was he trying to protect? Everyone in Washington knows that Fauci ran a huge kingdom. $38.5 billion in biodefense research money had been spent since 2002, when I was involved in the response with Dr. Fauci to the anthrax attacks. You spend $38.5 billion and you can't detect, disrupt, or even diagnose COVID-19 as it emerges. What are you doing? And I think Fauci, it was not just him being blamed, it was the fact that his whole effort was a failure. And so he decided to cover it up. Why anyone would do that, given the public health ramifications? It's really disturbing, and some people would say it's disgusting.
Some people would say it's borderline criminal. And
yeah, potentially, but why, and also who put Fauci in charge? He wasn't supposed to be in charge of any pandemic response. He's the immunology guy. He's supposed to develop drugs and long-term therapeutics, stuff going out decades in advance he's sort of the scientist charge of research and development. It was Bob Cadlick and Bob Redfield at CDC. Those guys, we used to call them the Dr. Bobs because they both are experienced practitioners of virology, and they'd spent their careers preparing for a pandemic. We had a pandemic, and who gets shunted aside? Both of them.
Somehow Fauci becomes the face of it, the voice of it, the media superstar of it, and anyone who diverges from what he says is ostracized and called anti-science because he is science. We got to leave it there, sadly.
Cadlick and Redfield thought it came out of a lab, so they were marginalized. That was
unbelievable.
No doubt. I was there.
It can't end with this hearing yesterday. We need to have a full-blown, completely transparent investigation, and let the chips fall where they may. Dr. David Asher, thank you, sir. I wish we had more time, but we just don't. Thank you, sir.
No, take care of him.
Thanks, Julie. We got Tulsi Gabbard tomorrow, but we got Chris Plant right now. Good morning, Chris.
Heck yeah, we got Joe Biden. He couldn't possibly do anything by executive order about the border until that became an issue in the